Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live stream I'm doing, this time with my old friend, Fritz Imperial. Fritz Imperial was one of sort of the early YouTube channels that started up in 2016, along with me and a few others. I think that Benjamin McLean was the other one. And I think we were kind of, I don't want to give ourselves too many pretensions, but we were kind of doing the NRX scene on YouTube before it was cool. And now it certainly is much more cool thanks to the return of people like Yarvin and Nick Lance to the social media scene. And I don't know. I just wanted to say, excuse me. I wanted to thank you for coming on the show, Fritz.
Mm-hmm.
And
always a pleasure.
Yeah. I always want to stream with my old friends once a year. I'm going to try to get the Franklin on as well.
Speaking of which, I just got a comment in one of my latest video by I think an old friend of ours, Son of Tiamat, and he wants to debate you about, or he still wants to bring up the issue of, well, you can't call fascists or the Nat Sox right wing; they're actually left wing socialists.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we've had this ongoing with Son of Tiamat where I tried to explain to him why debating over definitions is kind of stupid. Mm-hmm. We can talk about whether I don't know why I'm going on this digression, but we can talk about whether National Socialism is right wing or left wing. But it's a combination of both. Mm-hmm. But I think, as most people understand rightly, its right wing elements are more prominent and should be emphasized. Mm-hmm. It does not have the left wing ant smell; it has the right wing ant smell.
Yeah, and it also just kind of belies the idea that the only things that are actually important is absolute economic control by the government or absolute government control over like social issues. There's a lot more complexity to governments and ideology than that.
Yeah, I will warn my audience here. I'm recovering from an unexpected case of food poisoning I got last night. I'm fully recovered, but as always, food poisoning kind of lays you out a little bit. So I'll be a little bit lower energy here. But anyway, I have the entropy link in the stream if you guys want to send Fritz or I questions. But we were just going to go over general. I guess maybe we could start with, since we talked about this, the development of the right wing online, and I guess I could sort of segue into the other stuff that we wanted to talk about. The most recent stream I did, I said we were doing the NRX thing before it was cool, and then someone said, "Well, it's not cool anymore." I guess we were before it got cool, and then before it got uncool again. I don't know.
I mean, I'm not really.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not really sure. I would say it's uncool. I think there's still plenty of ideas. If anything, I think it's going to become more and more popular as centrism just becomes a completely untenable position from a logical standpoint. Just the fact that both centrism and would normie cons also basically be considered centrists?
Well, in my book they are, but this is. I think that the normie con stuff is really quickly dying. There's no constituency for it anymore.
I would just like any centrist to just try and answer for what is their response to Dark Brandon's speech a couple days ago when he's literally surrounded by like black and red lights and looks like Emperor Palpatine.
Yeah, and there were a lot of emphasis on the optics to that speech, and the sort of big brain Sam Harris take was.
Oh yeah, that was insane. Just him.
It was just optics, but he acted like the subject of the speech was insane as well. It was basically voting for the opposition party is a crime against democracy. That was the essence of the. As Aaron McIntyre, what does democracy mean in the sentence?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can tell you what Ezra Pound said, but I don't think YouTube would like it.
As long as it's none of the stuff about, well, anyway, Ezra Pound has a lot of choice quotes about a lot of things. So,
but yeah, and even more choice was our favorite bread tube pig man, Vosh, just being a little toady underneath Sam Harris, going, "Oh man, I agree with you, sticking to your principles. Really good statement on this." And the funniest bit is is Sam Harris saying, "Oh, this is a window into if Trump gave the speech, it'd be a window into his soul coming from one of the four horsemen of atheism."
Yeah, and then someone replied back, if souls exist, why can't we see them beaming through our microscopes, right? But at any rate, I think normie conservatism is essentially dead right now. I don't see it.
Like it or not, I guess the Republican Party's future is, Trumpism, whether the rhinos like it or not.
Yeah, and then the remainder is, well, I mean, I think people are kind of burned out on politics because they don't really have a team to fight for. There is no reasonable. Yeah, I think the centrists understand, if you're not like Sam Harris, they understand that there is a lot of problems that aren't being addressed by just being moderate Democrats. The Democrat Party has essentially been co-opted by a lot of its more extreme elements.
Mm-hmm. And that Brandon Biden, is not the guy that would just kind of try and bring things back to the center. If anything, he's just let things accelerate.
Yeah, which is odd because I thought there was a good chance that he could moderate things back down to their. I mean, he did moderate the rhetoric, he moderated the rhetoric on defund the police and the ACAB stuff. Mm-hmm. You notice that immediately pre and post after Biden, but he didn't actually moderate the policies when it came to trying to reduce crime, and he didn't try to moderate any of the other sort of deterrent stuff around the gender. In fact, he stepped into the sort of gender cult and the transgenderism stuff to an extent that I wouldn't have previously thought was possible.
It's funny is because I was just I responded to, or I retweeted somebody was kind of recently talking about, men make up the majority of the homelessness or prison populations. That's just talking about, this is is this really male privilege? I just said, look, we've gone way past male privilege. The whole feminism has basically imploded on itself because of the transgender movement, where it's just basically there is no male or female.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I also just wanted to bring this up. It's a bit off. It's a bit of a tangent, but it's something that it kind of gets into a bit of what I'd want to talk about, of returning to more simple and tying into stuff like how the left can't meme and why that is. And if you're looking for a laugh, if I can find it, I'll send it to you. But somebody found their annotations of C.S. Lewis by Ayn Rand, and it's just pretty funny seeing her incoherent screaming, him just talking about, these are eternal truths that have been known ever since the Middle Ages, and Ayn Rand going, oh, what do you think, we should go back to the Middle Ages or something?
It's like you think that Ayn Rand is, although hyperbolic and shrill, you think that she is at least a tier above Reddit atheism, and it turns out that she just is a Reddit atheist.
I do think it would have been, I wish we lived in the timeline where we had a public debate between her and Dorothy Day or somebody.
Oh, that would have been, I don't know, that would have been, you might as well make them do a Sam Hyde boxing match at that stage. I don't even know how they would communicate, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think Ayn Rand was not a very good communicator from what I've seen. She's just incapable of moving her priors at all. And
she always looked very uncomfortable in any interview.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, who knows? But it really was, you kind of see this sort of hereditary atheist ideas poking their heads up from out of the ground before Reddit was even a thing. Although, Reddit's gone through iterations as well. But I think, in terms of what is dying, obviously normie conservatism is dying. And, despite what Democrats desperately want to create two parties, one that's MAGA Republicans and the other one that's normal Republicans. And they keep on trying to meme this into existence so that they can, so that the United States has three parties, and that the conservative half of the country is competed over for two parties, so it can never win. And simultaneously, they can denounce one of those two parties as being undemocratic without obviously portending to a single party state, which is the natural conclusion of it's undemocratic to vote for the opposition party.
Yeah.
So I don't think the thing is, I don't think that's working. I don't think that's working at all. There's no constituency for Liz Cheney. There's no readers of Max Boot, or even other people like Barry Weiss, who are kind of trying to take up the centrist angle. Sometimes they're good journalists, but they don't know young people actually sympathize with that perspective.
And I think it's
even if they do good exposés.
And I think when it comes to people like David French, you just kind of have just a visceral disgust for him because he just sounds almost like a traitor. Like, the best comparison I have for David French is that he's like Saruman, where he, he's jealous of the dissident right because, they're the sexy ones. They're the kind of more up and coming, power in the right. And he's jealous of the left because they're the ones that are in power. And he's probably more afraid of a ascendant dissident right than he is of continuing progressive control. And that's why he's constantly talking about how he's defending, Drag Queen Story Hour and all that. And now I don't think he can do anything but double down, because if the right ever came into power, they'd want to hold him to account of why were you okay with, drag queens grooming children.
Well, I mean, the question is what I don't understand what David French's constituency is. I don't understand the people who read him. He's too conservative for leftists, and he's transparently ineffectual in his tactics and recommendations, which, again, like you said, don't feel like tactics, but feel like tactical surrender for the other side. And this is just it comes from a different age, and it's also not done. I mean, I imagine you could do this artfully. I imagine a more intelligent person than David French could. I mean, like Glenn Greenwald would be an example of a smarter David French to a certain degree. He's more on the left, but he's sort of this dyed-in-the-wool liberal and stands by liberal principles, even though they're obviously not in effect. But every time David French speaks, it just comes up like this guy is totally LARPing as a conservative. He has zero connection to the age he lives in. And it's not like he's some kind of poet like Glenn Greenwald, this like wide-eyed idealist who's going to stand on principle, even if it does mean that he's going to get completely BTFO'd. It just sounds like he doesn't understand the age where he lives.
Mm-hmm. It's just the intransigent, I guess, boomer mentality, that we cannot. It's fear of seeing some new form of right-wing movement, even though, what the left wing has become is just staring them in the face constantly.
Yeah.
Like the conservative response to Ukraine has just been completely, not unpredictable, but completely kind of disgusting. Just the whole thing of, and the optics around the whole student debt thing, because now it's just, there's no money for student loan forgiveness, but we can always scrounge another $5 billion for a foreign government.
Yeah, I mean, this is the war in Ukraine, I think, is kind of going disastrously. Pat Buchanan had an article where he outlaid the winners and losers of the Ukraine war. Mm-hmm. The losers are pretty predictably both the Russian and the Ukrainian people, along with probably all of the continent come winter, and they completely run out of energy. But the winners are just a bunch of NGOs and international politicians who, they basically need Ukraine to demonstrate how they're still willing to go to the wall for their client states, because if they don't, after the fiascos in Afghanistan and the fact that Assad and people are still in power, their clients are beginning to wonder if they really have their back, and so it's basically just a flex, and it's going to cost people millions of lives probably at the end of this.
And at the end, I've heard somebody else just say is, what the smartest policy on Ukraine is whatever prevents a nuclear war, we should do. But no, apparently we can have articles saying, we can have limited nuclear conflict and it'll be fine. But yeah, like, Russia is going to come out of this almost certainly. The worst case scenario is they really don't make many other gains, and eventually in the coming months they have to just walk away with a large chunk of eastern and southern Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the worst they're coming out of it, outside of all the deaths and the economic problems that's happened to Russia. But
yeah, and it looks as if Russia has called, economically at least, has called the bluff. I guess it certainly has not made their military look particularly effective, because it has not been nearly as devastating as I think the Russians thought it would be. but it's been devastating enough, and they probably will win the war ultimately. And in the meantime, what Russia has kind of come out on the winning side of is this global partnership bluff that America pulled to try to get everyone to boycott Russian energy. And really outside of our European client states, no one else did. Like India didn't, right?
Well, and also Europe, a lot of European countries just can't, because that's where their electricity comes from, or where their heat comes from.
Well, I mean, we'll see. I mean, they're heading into energy crisis right now, as
because the Germans, tragically, as always, have made the dumbest decision of shutting down. It's like, if you've ever seen the Stone Toss commercial cartoon where it's like displaying how on one side of a tug of war you have climate change deniers and pro-nuclear activists, and on the other you have like environmentalists and big oil.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting bedfellows that now the left is essentially on the warmonger side. Mm-hmm. I think more interestingly is just how we've learned now that the left, this whole like the universal idea of just sanctions is kind of insane, because you can't sanction a huge once you sanction a country that you rely on, you're basically sanctioning yourself.
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, this is kind of, it's amazing that no one figured this out, but everyone was trained under this concept of sort of 1990s. I wouldn't say like battleship diplomacy. It's almost like, bank diplomacy, where you just, you threaten sanctions, and then people do what you want because they think you have like this unstoppable coalition of people who will follow you.
But and also you're having a coalition. If it's a coalition against, Serbia, it's quite different than against one of the nuclear-armed major world power.
Well, I think Serbia probably prefigured this in a lot of ways, because Russia saw the Serbian wars as NATO picking off its allies in the region and replacing them with client states. So it's actually a good analogy in a lot of ways. But America is not the same place it was in 1999. When the Kosovo war started, and
neither is Russia.
Neither is Russia, yeah. Although I would say, I don't know. It seems that the United States have changed a lot more than Russia has.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I think was Putin in charge in 1999? I think maybe he came in 2000. I always
I think it was 1999, then to like 2008, then back after 2012.
Yeah, I don't think he really. Well, I mean, I think after that period was basically just a puppet.
Oh yeah.
Putin's been de facto in charge of Russia for the since the 2000s. But yeah. I mean, this is Russian experts have been warning us about this for a while. But that's actually the least interesting thing about it, because you could talk about Russia's problems with demographics, the same ones that everyone else is having. And you could talk about their struggles to maintain a modern military. But at the end of the day, the country that's really transformed radically, in my opinion, is the United States and the West generally. Mm-hmm. And it's just a question of what can they effectively do, and what is the coherent message from the United States. There's this really great essay by Morgoth called "Contrapoints: Afghanistan and the Broken Violin," where he said, that no one really understands, like, who in the American political coalition believes that America has the moral right to rule the world or rule a significant part of it. Like, almost nobody. And even then, like, maybe feminism is like some kind of justifying example that can get enough Americans on board. But you're promoting a type of feminism to the Afghanis that your own activists in this country call transphobic and regressive. So it's just like no one can take this seriously anymore.
Especially since so much, back in the 2000s, how many professors were decrying American imperialism in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah. I mean, well, that was. I mean, this is as we've known always that I think Noam Chomsky might be a true believer in anti-imperialism, although maybe not. Didn't he support Syria? Like Syrian interventions.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, but I think there are very few just honest to God anti-imperialists, at least on the American left, I should say.
Yeah, you found it's like you're finding more on the right. I mean, so many people. How many people on the right are just vehemently against giving more money to Ukraine?
Yeah, that will be interesting to see. I guess the question is like what I've said many times on this channel recently is we're at a complete standstill, it seems, politically. The center right's dying. The center left is showing itself to be rather totalitarian in its impulses. And the left wing is kind of like this LARP, but no one wants to move because moving to the right is sort of suicidal, or moving off of the leftist reservations on any choice issue is absolutely suicidal for your career, for your social life, and for your job as a influencer if you're a young person. And so everyone's just kind of stalemated. That's my read on the situation.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, moving forward, it just seems like, because I kind of I brought this up earlier, but it's kind of the crux of what I want to talk about is the idea of returning to more simple principles. Because you know how there's the bell curve showing like the low IQ guy, the midwit, and then the high IQ guy and the low IQ and high IQ person have basically the same conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of coming to the idea that often a lot of very simple lessons about how reality works at this point kind of need to be relearned by people, just especially as the left seems becoming more and more. If you know we're in the postmodern era, it seems like I think the next one is, or at least for the left, is the post-reality era, and the fact that you can just things are just so malleable that there is no real concrete definitions for anything anymore. But yeah, like learning basic simple truths often lead to very deep truths as opposed to kind of midwit pretentious stuff.
Well, does the left have to interact with reality? And with the advent of virtual reality, I'm convinced at this stage that the left wing is literally going to become just like a fictional consumer product inside Meta or something.
Yeah, I mean,
it'll be a completely parasocial political movement. It'll be a completely imaginary experience. Like you participate in this revolution that can only exist inside digital reality. Mm-hmm. It might track into real world in the real world by getting people fired from their jobs, or trying to get gender reassignment surgery or whatnot, or whatever the new thing is. But I don't see the left even. It seems to be sort of optimizing itself as kind of a consumer lifestyle rather than any kind of principle or revolutionary perspective.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that's something that they can rely on indefinitely. At some point, reality is going to hit them, unless I mean, I think a lot of them are just betting on the idea that they can just slip into literal pods and escape into some sort of virtual fantasy world.
Oh, that's what Mark Zuckerberg's literally talking about these days. I mean, it looks. I mean, I guess in 2022, that was an interesting thing, is you got to see Meta, which is simultaneously horrific in its concept. It's like, your life sucks, so we're going to lock you in the Matrix. Is literally one of its advertisements. Literally just said that, like, life sucks, we're going to lock you in the Matrix.
I mean, it's an even worse dystopia, or it's even worse than the movie The Matrix, because at this point, there's people that will willingly plug themselves in.
Yeah, which was Baudelaire's critique of The Matrix, actually. His critique was that, there's an act of consent involved, and also it would be almost impossible to distinguish reality from The Matrix itself. But the other interesting thing about Meta is that the implementation of it just sucked. It looked worse than Second Life. Basically, it was almost like a strictly worse version of Second Life. Mm-hmm. I couldn't actually believe how bad it was.
Yeah, it's some like 2006 era graphics.
Yeah, like the Mark Zuckerberg with like this doll-like expression. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
As opposed to what he normally looks like.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all his meta humor, where he met, like, in the commercial for Meta, he met with his friends, and one person's like, "I'm a robot," and Mark Zuckerberg said, I thought I was supposed to be a robot." Mm-hmm. He's trying to get on like the right side of this joke, but he doesn't like what's so funny is that he understands everyone thinks that he's just completely he doesn't scan as human, and he's completely unempathetic and not very relatable. But he can't fix it. All he can do is sort of meme about it.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it just going into more simple truths that I think people are ultimately going to be happier in, because people are starting to look for answers, and it's just kind of weird, just because the interview that Shia LaBeouf had with Bishop Barron, I know you talked about the not trusting celebrity converts, and I get that. It's just, at the very least, we're probably going to get a very good movie about St. Padre Pio.
Well,
I just love this clip of it where he's just screaming at a woman to say Christ is Lord.
That's a very memeable moment, isn't it? Right.
Yes.
That's but I might have to say it's I know of a lot of people who really love Padre Pio, and he's sort of a divisive figure. Some people really like him. Some people think, he's overblown. But the it might be an interesting movie. Mm-hmm. I just don't trust celebrity conversion stories at all. I've told you this, but this is before your time, but anyone in my generation who was Catholic remembers the Anne Rice conversion story. She had this what would appear to be a very devout conversion to Catholicism, to the point where she was writing whole stories about the Bible in sort of her contemporary trash fiction style, but still very, very compelling. And then, the gay marriage controversy kicks up in 2008. And a few years later, she's like, Catholics are all homophobic. I'm leaving the church. It's it was just embarrassing. And it was embarrassing because it showed that this, and people were surrounding this conversion, oh my God, look guys, Catholicism is cool. Anne Rice, she's smart. She writes all these books, she's converting, but she's not. She had absolutely no understanding of the faith whatsoever. She was poorly catechized, and people were allowing her to form their own opinions of their faith, and it was kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, it's I remember you told me about it, and you're kind of the second that she realized Catholicism required any sort of opposition to the modern world, she's completely bowed out of it.
Yeah. And this is why this was part of the John Paul II perspective, was that you can combine orthodoxy or orthodox religious views with a certain amount of winsomeness and openness, but you really can't. You really can't sell people the sugar and then squirrel away sort of the parts that society disagrees with, and that's sort of a completely futile endeavor on so many levels.
Because I don't want to put you on the spot, but two live streams ago that you made, you did kind of point out the whole "don't bring politics into the church," and I completely agree. Now, number one, it is our God-given right to bully the Jesuits, and we should never lose that. But I do agree that I don't want the church's number one. The entire point of the church is the right worship of God and the celebration of the sacred mysteries, not politics, which is why I don't want it. I just want it to not have either. I don't want them talking about BLM in the church.
I think you can bring politics into the church as long as it is very tightly linked to some kind of orthodoxy, abortion being murder. That's literally part of the catechism.
I mean, is that even politics? That's more, just basic morality.
Yeah, or I don't know, something like charity has a political dimension to it sometimes. But the idea of using the church to start knife fights with people over issues that don't directly pertain to the church's teaching is, I think, again, it's ultimately short-sighted, because you're destroying something that really needs to be following its mission, and you're digressing it to something else that's cruder.
And especially with left wing, what originally made me create my channel was just the BLM movement is just a Trojan horse to bring more progressive politics into Christianity.
Well, I don't know. Are Protestants still going down that
Yes.
route? They are. I mean, that's kind of sad. It's amazing that they can't see this for what it is. I mean, to me, it seems pretty obvious, right?
Also, just the whole BLM thing, in a lot of ways, is genuinely goes against explicit like Christian doctrines. Like, it's literally saying like white people are born with an extra sin, and a sin that apparently you can't get rid of ever.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it'd have to be pretty explicit. I mean,
I've read articles
BLM is
saying that by
yeah.
white liberal evangelicals.
I mean, BLM is a terrible political movement. Don't get me wrong, but the thing is trying to get into trying to discredit it by quoting Christian theology back at it is, I think, going to cause more harm than good. I think once you demonstrate to people that the organization is corrupt and that the broader movement is about vanity and not actually about solving problems, I think the larger theological question really answers itself.
That's true.
You don't need to argue people that extortion is bad or that movements that hurt the very people that they claim that they're helping are bad. If you just argue it if you just put the case that way, it also avoids this like messy fights with people who might be embarrassed to. Priests, like, they get caught up on social media a lot, even Orthodox priests that have good opinions otherwise, and calling them out in public because they didn't research an organization that everyone else is praising is like that can have disastrous consequences.
Someone just said in the chat that, I think Christianity is going to continue to shrink, and it's like, in what places? Because statistically, worldwide, it's not.
Well, it's going to increase in Africa. I mean, it's going to
increase in the places where population's increasing.
I don't know. Will it shrink? I mean, I guess it's at some point it kind of reaches a limit of shrinkage. That sounded strangely dirty and Seinfeld-like, but but it does it does reach a limit because in Europe Christianity can't really shrink anymore.
You're going to be left with the actual believers.
Yeah, Christianity, it's like Europe itself is dying for a variety of reasons, but I don't know if Christianity's share of the European population really has much more to lose. In America, it's obviously more complicated. The obviously every generation is markedly, except for specific religious communities, the ones that go through the mainstream system are less religious typically. That is mainstream elite institutions. But again, this hits a barrier with the millennial generation in that millennial progressives just don't have children. And it's actually kind of ridiculous how stark it is. So eventually that trend has to reverse.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, what will this country look like post all of these changes? And I think we're seeing all of the transformations sort of unfold before our very eyes. There's sort of, it's hard to know what the mainstream or the cathedral wants to erect as the guiding ideological vision of the plebeians like ourselves.
I'm not even sure really they have a vision they can sell, or they have a vision.
They have a vision. They don't have one they can sell.
Mm-hmm. And increasingly they can't. It's becoming harder to sell. I know Endeavor kind of made the point that the kind of lifestyle of the consumer is just not going to be viable in the future. I think in a lot of ways, because people can't even.
True.
Sorry.
That's definitely true. There's also just a lack of freshness with it too. Like, I didn't actually watch this movie, but I kind of caught reviews of it and saw a few memes on Twitter. Like this whole She-Hulk thing. It's kind of funny because there's this. She gives this speech about being catcalled, and then a few scenes later, she just like spontaneously starts twerking with this other sassy black lawyer, and it's hilarious because it's just, first of all, it's transparently incoherent. There's no there when it comes to understanding the nature of how male-female relations should be. But more than that, like these things like cat-calling memes and twerking, that's from like 2013. It hasn't changed at all since then. Like there hasn't been any new thing that's come around. Even if you did like twerking, it's like all of these 38-year-old millennial women they just can't get over that summer when they were 29 and got into this stuff. And they've been playing on repeat since then.
They formed their entire personality around like stupid memes.
So, well, yeah, I mean, there's that, and there's
Oh yeah, somebody pointed like, yeah, She-Hulk or the author's poorly disguised fetish. Yeah, there's probably a bit of that.
Well, I thought it was written by a woman. Is it actually some like fetishist that's?
It could be a woman with the fetish. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. It's strange, but why my point is just that this stuff is just transparently not going anywhere.
It's fake.
It's fake, and I don't know what. Again, like I said, we're just kind of frozen out. You can't move, right? So no one does, and at the same time, just like the Democratic Party can't. Something is stopping it from moderating. Something is stopping Joe Biden from pulling a Bill Clinton and fixing things well enough so that the Democrats' political prospects aren't going to be seriously hurt.
Although if they've realized that they can fortify elections, they might care even less about trying to fix things.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's the idea is that they're just going to change the demographics so that they don't have to fix anything. That might ultimately be the point. I mean, this is there's sort of a depressing thread on Twitter the other day I saw about how it's hard to you can't really collapse your way out of the problem. Well, I don't know, maybe you can, but you're looking for some kind of reaction to fix things. But the more you collapse, the more sort of lazy and stupid people get, and the more people are all right with making selfish decisions for themselves at the expense of the body politic. And so it sort of becomes like this black hole that is the third world. Mm-hmm. The third world can sort of have an indefinite amount of collapse because nothing can ever get people to unify around a collective morality, or there's no political incentive for competency, because the point is simply to blame the other side and create a political coalition that is going to raid the public coffers and emerge on the opposite side or richer through pure self-indulgence. And like it's a feedback loop. So you can imagine any amount of decline not actually triggering a response or a reaction.
Unless it's like that extreme of beyond third world collapse.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, we're getting towards like, Fallout, but
beyond, yeah. Well, I people speculate that we could go sort of when America starts to enter into the cycle that's really captured a lot of places in, say, Latin America and Africa, that it's just going to collapse instantly, because in many ways we're holding up the system of Latin America and Africa through aid and through political support, and so there will be a reaction.
Is coming to Africa, or no more aid's coming to Africa. Then
it's hard to exactly know with Africa, right? It's hard to exactly know to what extent the Western powers are propping up their bad decisions, and to what extent this would simply go on regardless. But this becomes sort of a question mark. We know there can be indefinite collapse in terms of the African and Latin American context, but it either will collapse faster or there'll have to be an immune response because of the fact that too much relies on America being competent. And I think 2022 has really shaken our opinion of that, because I think we've seen America be massively incompetent, and the political class seems nowhere close to actually reacting and becoming more moderate.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, what we should probably think about more is just what's actionable, and it's cultivating virtue, making small communities that are going to last, building houses of I guess it's kind of like the Three Little Pigs, just trying to build the house out of brick, not the one out of sticks.
I think this is ultimately the correct response. Is accelerationism just doesn't seem to be viable, and parallelism seems to be the only option. The question at that point is, what does that look like? Like, other than just saying, like, build your own community. Like, what does it actually look like?
Because the problem is that you could just be like, okay, we're gonna have this like super based like Catholic community out in the countryside. Well, then they're just going to Ruby Ridge that.
Well, I'm speaking like much more temporally. I mean, the right wing movement in this country it's a middle class movement. It's not. I mean, it's got some people in the upper middle class, some people in the upper class, but very few like turbo elite people. Most of the turbo elite people are progressives or moderate Democrats affiliated, and so as such, like you're talking about like separatism. Well, okay, that's fine, but how do you organize this? Like, you can't just dump money on it. You can't just like let's build a new community. Middle class people need jobs. They don't have enough money just to buy up tons of land, unless you're going to do something really radical and just kind of move out into the desert with your friends and try to do something like that. The question is, like, how does that actually work? And I mean, you could do things like create sort of alternative intellectual societies, which is what I think a lot of us are doing. But there's going to be a barrier between that and kind of moving it to the next stage, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And it's again just trying to find. I don't know. It's also just trying to evangelize in a way people to understand that there is other options. There is, because the uphill battle is it's trying to get people to think more long term, and just that's not increasingly the case. People the West has just become addicted to self-indulgence and I guess high time preferences, to use that phrase.
Yeah, I mean that is literally the process. That's literally the Nick Landian version of democratic degeneration. Is that democracy is always the victory of high time preference over low time preference. That's what causes the generation loop.
How do you convince the working and middle class to actually know you need to, not resort to pornography, cheap beer, and cheap entertainment, and actually try and take the more arduous road that's ultimately more rewarding? But
I mean, are you going to accomplish that? Like, I don't know. I don't think you're going to. Like I said, I think that the problem is like what like this is another thing too. One thing you might see from 2016 to now. I still have a lot of stuff to talk about because I do political analysis and I write Substack essays. But in 2016, it was very clear who I was trying to convince. I was trying to convince sort of the moderate, not insanely, yeah, well, Sargon would be a good example, but like the moderate, not insanely progressive ex-new atheists or still new atheists who were looking at the political situation and couldn't figure out what was going on with stuff like feminism everywhere and uncontrolled borders and declining competence of institutions and all this other stuff, and rank ideology being promoted as science. That's who I was speaking to. But the thing is at this stage, I mean, some moderate communities aside, who I think are willfully trying to plug their ears over the true nature of the problems, it's hard to exactly know who you're trying to convince. The left isn't listening, and so maybe new generations will be different, but the left isn't listening, and the moderates understand the consequences of crossing the cathedral and the capacities where we need them to cross the cathedral.
Because I guess the other demographic that's very hard to convince is like, because like not to dox myself or anything, but in my line of work where I work in quality, I'm a quality assurance technician for a hunting company, and man, that place, we dunk on the midwits a lot, but this is gonna sound mean, but man, those places are also filled with the dad's acronym.
Yeah,
And
for people who don't know, that was Deracinated American Dipshit was the acronym DADS.
mm-hmm. Or it's like, or the three B's is like, I don't know, boobs, beer, and ball. Like
Yeah.
the cheap bread and circuses, and it's like a lot of those people are just. It seems like they just cannot comprehend higher form of thinking, where they love to complain about Brandon all the time. They love they love Steven Crowder, they love all of that, but the second you try and like say actually porn is evil, or you try and maybe a little less explicit than that, but any sort of like deeper ideas of conservatism or right wing thought, they just immediately shut down, because anything that interrupts, their access to cheap entertainment.
Well, certainly, I'm of the opinion that people like that you shouldn't spend time convincing, right? I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The people who you want to convince are people who are actually interested in trying to find things, the curious people, and that's where any kind of pushback against this has to start.
More middle class, or people that are at least
Well, I
reasonably
think we're
intelligent.
kind of in the dregs of the middle class, because the middle class is such a catch-all term. But what I really mean is people who aspire to be sort of Brahmins, even if they're not involved with the Brahmin ideology.
Mm-hmm. We're trying to convince them not to be Brahmins, but to be nobles.
Well, okay. I mean, yeah, I guess you could say that. Like, we want them to follow sort of the European path of Brahmanism, which is much more nobles than sort of like the Hindu idea of Brahmanism, or much more like aristocracy. I just meant people who are like in the intellectual caste, or who aspire to enter the intellectual caste. The issue is, once more, the question is just degradation itself works for the left. That's what I've learned, I think, post-COVID, is that everyone being sick and atomized actually is a huge boost for the left, because it denies people the avenues towards interacting with collective health and experiencing it and desiring something higher. And it creates people who are just constantly worried about, okay, how do I avoid this pitfall? How do I get the best for myself? I don't have any contacts. Oh, look, social media. How do I get clout?
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, I think the right wing has become kind of an anti-technology party politically. In some ways, I should say.
Anti-dependence on it, in the sense of, focusing on the ill effects of social media and trying to it has to become like the human party in a way, the anti-humanist party.
Well, the next question is, how do you use it without becoming independent on it, which is a hard question. It's difficult.
I mean, as you said last stream, which is that the goal of any political movement is to ultimately just abolish itself, because you fix the problem. But
yeah, well, yeah, that's. Well, I don't think we're going to fix this problem of the technology problem anytime soon. The problem right now is, and I said this is thinking, if the problem is not like some policy or the other, the problem is that the people who should care about this don't care about it. The people who should care about the fact that their society is falling apart rapidly don't care about it, and rather care about whatever is sort of giving them clout, individually speaking, or whatever is the most popular issue of the day. None of the issues that the Biden administration or the cathedral have wanted to be popular, the popular issues of the day, have anything to do with what we should actually be paying attention to. If you were, say, for instance, someone who is interested in good governance, the big issues are a bottoming out labor force participation rate, and the fact that the cost of things like housing and education are so high it's almost impossible to start families. This has essentially created the situation where we find ourselves in now, where there's really no path. There's no. It's hard to imagine a conceivable path for a young person to follow to get to a place they would consider to be healthy and good.
Especially since the left, as evident by Brandon's speech a couple days ago, they're far more interested in the more important issues of, humiliating or attacking their political opponents. perceived or real.
Yeah, certainly the Brandon guys are. I mean, someone asked me this question: are human beings so vindictive that they'll prefer being able to be on the winning side and beating the shit out of their opponents, even as everything that they love and that's good just kind of drains away into the ether?
Yes.
I mean, our target audience, or at least what I think is mine, is a subset of people who don't think that's the case, or who feel like, I don't care, I'll be on the wrong side as long as I can, as long as I have the chance of preserving that stuff which is truly beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Thing is, though, often I think people are losing sight of what even is beautiful anymore, since since time just keeps making it more and more of a distant memory, and you have all the historic revisionism, essentially saying any time period that is. It's the idea, any America was always evil and racist except between 1861 and 65 and 1941 and 1945. But, we've never actually been progressive, and we've always been, evil and racist. And so people start believing that they can't actually have nostalgia for the past. It's like the issue with the video game Bioshock Infinite, right? Or the idea poisons the mind of when you look at these kind of beautiful colorized and restored footage of London or Paris or Berlin from 1900, and just everyone looks so much healthier and so much more full of life and well dressed. And of course just the average person just keeps it just has to constantly be reminded, or the explanation to why we aren't like this is that, well, this is only possible because these people were all evil racists.
Yeah, this is thing Steve Saylor points out. The modern person's understanding of history is becoming more and more cartoonized as things go on. It's becoming more good guys versus bad guys, blah 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 blah. These guys are the ones in the red hats. The black hats. These guys are the ones in the white hats, and you need to be on the right side of history.
Mm-hmm. The right side of history is always, whatever the most modern thing, and people have no concept that even just the idea that the whole trans movement, right, is nobody on the left, or at least so many of the mainstream left, believed any of this 10 years ago.
Well, do they believe it now? There's this whole controversy over, Chicago Children's, right, where they were caught basically admitting that they give minors what they call gender affirming care, which is actually surgeries, like cosmetic surgeries. And no one stood up and said, oh, I think minors should be able to have cosmetic surgeries. They said that this isn't happening, even though it obviously is, and they tried to bury the story. There was no defense of that. It was just, oh, this is embarrassing, make the story go away.
Yeah. I mean, it's also somebody just posted in the chat earlier, it's Nazis punching Nazis. And it's if you look at, I was never into them, but I'm seeing videos on the newer Wolfenstein games, is they take themselves just so seriously, even though this is a series where you fight Hitler in a robot suit. But now it's oh, we have to take this, we have to be part of this rising up revolution against Nazi controlled America.
No, I heard that they did sort of some more social justice-y stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was always going to happen, right? Antifa fighting, it was Saving Private Ryan in the 2000s, the Wolfenstein thing. You're the
Wolfenstein goes back
American.
to the 90s, though.
Oh yeah. But I mean, the 1994 version, I don't think the character had much of a personality or background. But I remember in the 2000s remake, it was very much this square jawed kind of I'll say this Aryan-looking U.S. Marine or Special Forces guy taking on the Nazis, and then now it's it's gotten to the typical thing where you have to have all of the grievance groups rising up to take out the Nazis. Mm-hmm. Again, I don't know. This stuff obviously to us is ugly. I wonder. It must be ugly to a lot of other people as well, and I can't help but think that this is what eventually is going to be its undoing.
I mean, like, there's even the news, like, the sixth Grand Theft Auto game is going to be paused and have a female protagonist, and it's like, I guess in a similar way to say 40K is, that kind of ruins it, because I'm not a big GTA fan, but that's kind of the charm, was that it was, this kind of early 2000s aggressive kind of mindset.
Yeah, it's hard to say with Grand Theft Auto because I can't really disaggregate that. I don't know what the sublime beauty or sense of Grand Theft Auto even was.
I think it was more just
like indulged. It's like saying that like pornography in the early 2000s like had this je ne sais quoi that modern pornography doesn't. Like I'm sure, but like, first of all, I wouldn't know these days, but like it does. I don't understand Grand Theft Auto in a sublime enough way to detect that kind of difference, right?
Yeah, I mean, me neither. I'm not. A lot of people, it's probably because when they were kids, they watched or they played it, and it's like it was like the game you're not supposed to play, and also it's like people were able to. It was like one of the earlier open world games, so it kind of had that. But
yeah. Oh yeah. Well,
world now. So
yeah, that's I hate open world games, so there's a reason why I probably didn't play it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at any rate, I don't know. Looking forward, I think it's interesting for the right. There's another article I talked about the whole Pedro Gonzalez has the dissident right evaporated because it's been absorbed into the mainstream. I think that's interesting to look at.
What does he mean exactly by mainstream, though?
He has been people like himself and people from the Claremont Institute. I don't think he thinks that the majority of right wingers are reading Nick Land. I think he just means that it's something that people are aware of now, and they're no longer thinking in the whole libertarian mode or in the whole we're the good shepherds kind of deal, which is kind of ridiculous ways for conservatives to think.
When you had Charlie Kirk get booed off the stage because just saying the same stuff, or like people bringing up, because I know Nick Fuentes his whole thing is completely collapsed, but at least the ideas of we're not going to do this whole just leave us alone libertarian conservatism anymore. No one believes that anymore.
Yeah, but I mean, this is funny. It's that Charlie Kirk revamped his message, and it looks like he's going to outlast Nick Fuentes.
Yeah, he basically stole Nick Fuentes' talking points, just packaged them as a little more palatable.
Yeah, a lot more palatable, and I don't think Nick did himself any favors with the number of the edgier angles he took.
Or
I always remember this,
his own exploits, but
well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, he's gotten a lot of second chances, and he's squandered a lot of them. Maybe he'll bounce back. I think this is always the possibility on the internet. No one's ever really gone on the internet. Isn't Andy Worski back now? And you thought that he saw the last of him, right?
I mean, the last I just saw of him was he got like beaten at one of the celebrity boxing matches, but
yeah, but he I think he has like a podcast or something that's popular these days. He like everyone thought he was done, but I mean, Fuentes's problem is that it's hard to understand his appeal outside of
edgy
young men on the internet, and you have to go beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know, like, especially with this whole the incel stuff really solidified it, which is like this. I guess I know it's a joke, but at some point, it's hard that this stuff sort of becomes not a joke after a while, because it becomes he literally is. If it was a joke once, that would be kind of funny, but the repetition of these idiotic ideas about inceldom, it becomes him,
or just kind of
it becomes his own movement. So sure, it's a joke, but it's a joke at the expense of his followers.
Or the idea of like, not to like say sexism, but like the fact that there was this very aggressive, like, starting out just as a LARPy, no femoids, no women in our group. Eventually, if you actually want to be taken seriously, a right-wing political movement, especially if it's centered around families, kind of needs both sexes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm actually kind of open to single-sex political movements, to be honest. I mean, it's. I'm not saying that you have to or anything else like that, but I think that I understand. Like, I'll pause here and say, like, I get what Nick Fuentes was complaining about. He's complaining about this sort of the whole thirst trap phenomenon, where the cloud gravitates towards these communities that advertise women because women have better optics naturally. But what it creates is a bunch of men that are circling women for like as if they're social media figures, and that's just it's not a good. That's
And
not a
then
good. It's not a good. Like that's a very bad situation.
and then the women just end up being like shit libs in the end.
Well,
Or like, you know, like it's just like one of them saying like, "Oh no, we're like a new conservative movement. We're more inclusive, more open," and it's just the opposite of what people want.
well, you're already by virtue of you centering women as some necessary component to your political movement. You're literally playing into like a core left wing trope of you need more women and minorities.
Yeah,
So you're
I get
already
that.
doing that, right? And
I get that.
secondly, you're playing into like a sort of self-destructive element among men to
Be Sims.
to be simps and to kind of like gravitate towards women. Like I always said this, for young men, like she needs to be a fan of you. You don't need to be like you need to be there. You need to desire her, and you need to be there for her, and you need to care for her. But like if there's sort of like a fan and fandom following, it kind of needs to go from the woman to the man to be really healthy. And so in the field of politics, having the representation be so dominated by females, it's just not a very healthy relate. I mean, there's some exceptions. There's some very good female content creators. Obviously, Poe the person in Academic Agents community is really good, and I can name a few others too. But when clout is the currency, and when political arenas become fandoms, then the danger of just people simping out is really high.
I mean, I was more. It's not so much that; it's just more of thinking. Families should. If you have a political movement based on families, celebrating kind of inceltdom is not exactly conducive to that.
Yeah,
I think that's more what I meant. If you get
yeah, you might. I mean, this is what I think. I don't even know if this is supposed to be taken seriously, right, from Nick Fuentes' perspective. But I mean, there's maybe I should move off Nick Fuentes. There are all these sort of problems. Like there's the men going their own way too is another example of this. Like there's
MGTOW still a thing though.
Well, I mean, it is. There are forums and there are channels and all this stuff. But what you'll hear from them a lot of times is you'll hear a lot of complaints that in isolation are perfectly fine. They're good, and not necessarily good, but like they sound good and they describe a real problem. But then when that complaint tries to stand up and be independent, it just kind of falls apart and becomes incoherent. MGTOW would be a good example of this. Like the complaint about, I mean, they talk more about women than any of the traditionalist channels do. And all the married men talk about like books and ideas, and like the MGTOW ones talk about women. I mean, what the hell's going on, right? We're the ones that are supposed to be simping out and marrying women and starting families and organizing our life around women. So this is what I'm pointing to. I should say is what they have is they have a complaint. They don't have a coherent approach to the world in MGTOW, and the same thing is true for things like pickup artists and other elements of the right. Is that what the right needs to produce are just coherent ways to hold yourself and sort of like it relative to the world. And part of that's not flexing power you don't have. Part of that is not giving in to the degeneration like the dads do, or like you're for degeneration as long as you are benefiting from it. And part of that is earnestly being able to talk about what you're valuing and what you want to pursue, and doing something to kind of go in that direction to put your money where your mouth is.
Mm-hmm. Wondering, unless you have more stuff, we could talk about some kind of cultural stuff we've been into lately, because there's some stuff I've been
sure. Yeah,
because like
I have just an announcement. I'm coming up on 40K subscribers, and I did promise
yeah,
I don't know, 40K video or a 40K live stream.
which I'd be happy to be part of that.
I think it would call it something like 40 lessons from 40K or something like that. Oh yeah, the problem is I'd have to be careful about how many people I invited, but the because once you get past 4 people on a live stream, it becomes absolutely insane.
Yeah, no, three or 4 people is probably good, but
Settlers Lament has made 5 or 6 work, but then you're really pushing it. But anyway, go ahead. What did you want to talk about?
I mean, just like trying to cultivate it's like I've been just trying to in terms of simplicity as a theme I was touching on. It's that just trying to learn and appreciate more simple stuff. It's weird because as I've been getting older, as I've headed into my late 20s, genetics has kind of cast their lot, and my hair is starting to thin out and go. And it's kind of similar to a lot of the stuff, right, where it's stuff that you love and hold dear and is good, but is transient, and it's ultimately better just to try and live without. And I don't know, it's just like with 40K, I'm still a huge fan of it, but man, some of the directions they're going in now, like I know Arch Warhammer makes some really good videos on it, and just like he just despises the direction they're going into in terms of like what they've done with the God Emperor. And like in case you didn't know that, like in the lore, the Emperor had his like technically 21 super demigod sons that he basically, and like the original story, it's actually kind of cool the fact that he kind of made this secretive deal with the gods of chaos in order to create them, and then like when he kind of turned his back on them and wanted to destroy them, they scattered them across the galaxy and sowed the seeds of them turning on him. They literally then just like said in a book, I think it's called Master of Mankind, oh no, the Emperor actually, no, it wasn't that, it was his wife that did that, because the Emperor apparently had
a
like
wife.
in a way, there's like this some broad now exists called like Erda or whatever, who is also just an immortal like him, and like had part of her DNA help create the Space Marines, and she is the one that scattered them out into the ether for no reason, just because she doesn't like the Emperor. And like it was like her and her friend just didn't like the Emperor since like the beginning of time. And it's like, so it's not so much like the Imperium is becoming more progressive, it's that the Emperor is becoming less based, because he's he now, instead of being like the enigmatic brilliant master of mankind, now he's just a Reddit tier kind of loser that had no idea what he was doing.
I can see, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure there's a way you could make that storyline based, but I really doubt they're doing it, right?
Yeah,
you could turn it into sort of like the primordial woman opens up the gates of chaos thing that you find in
they're portraying
Adam and Eve and Pandora's box and all this stuff.
No, they're portraying her as a positive figure.
Yeah, well, I mean, even Pandora aren't entirely negative. Yeah, I doubt that this is of course the path that Morgoth described, right? Warhammer was created by British history nerds, and they took British history, like not British history, just history generally, as their template, as their canvas for creating a science fiction thing, and they linked everything back to myth, and like very, very, very dark myth as well, as it actually stood. And then by the time we are where we are now, the people who are controlling Warhammer are just Warhammer fans. And they've come to associate Warhammer with like the bolter and the chain swords and the Space Marine armor. And to them, it's all like these kind of atomized elements. The deeper stuff that it was alluding to in history is not there anymore.
Which is ironic, because Warhammer takes itself so seriously now. But if you look at, what Warhammer was when it was created in the late 1980s, it's just very silly.
Yeah, and it was very silly. I don't know. It's weird. It
was created originally just as like as an adaptation or like just a separate version of Warhammer Fantasy, and then they're like,
Yeah.
well, we just kind of, and then they just kind of slowly made it a little more serious, and it's kind of, and the artwork, evolved to actually look more decent, something you could take seriously than this cartoonish stuff from the 80s of, super bright, colorful space marines fighting goblins.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it obviously derives from the fantasy element. It's taken over from that.
But they've even destroyed the fantasy, like Warhammer Fantasy. Like the canon of that is they said Chaos won and destroyed the world, and so now they're just sucked into a new universe.
Yeah, which doesn't make any sense. Even like you can't even imagine it. It's hard to imagine what the stakes are.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine this is part of a cycle where people kind of get, I mean, I think that we're just sort of, as a species, standing at a crossroads where some people are going to live in the world that is real and dark and actually has nuance to it and want fiction to represent that. And then other people are going to sort of retreat into a like meta, basically, like a metaverse where everything has filed away edges.
It would make for a good science fiction story, right? Of you have a group of kind of like based survivors who are just kind of living in new tribes in a post-apocalyptic world where the vast majority of the population are just in literal pods, and the ethical dilemma is: do we just try and end that, or do we let them live?
Well, I mean, in some sense, you could argue that science fiction future has already been written in H.G. Wells' The Time Machine between the Eloi and the Morlocks.
Oh yeah.
The Eloi and the Morlocks represent the same distinction, that the Eloi live an existence that is molded by domesticity, a world of non-scarcity, and there's no virtual reality in it, but there might as well be. Whereas the Morlocks are the ones that are actually experiencing the hard Darwinian edge, which has also kind of disfigured them brutally. And it might eventually be the fate of humanity, but we'll see. I think that there's one thing this year demonstrated also is this whole great resets thing. I don't think that they're going to be able to pull it off successfully. I think it's increasingly apparent that this stuff is just going to come fall in a heap. Yeah, and we'll be back to something that's closer to the way things used to be, in a bad way, I should say.
Yeah, but and in a way, it's like I've said this before, but I was thinking is that if we were just conquered by some if like Bronze Age pervert and his like nudist bodybuilders just like became like Genghis Khan and conquered the West, I'd be like, you know what, that's at least less humiliating than being run by a bunch of drama students.
Yeah.
There is at least something to be said for rule by the strong, where it's like at least it's honest.
Well, and it also creates a sort of tight feedback loops that actually make a community or a civilization stronger over time. Mm-hmm. Whereas the drama kids are nothing but fakeness. That's their entire
they're fake and gay.
Well, yeah, that's what this is what they're kind of known for is this. And I don't know. I mean, the question is, a cultural thing that I've been getting increasingly into has been poetry, and this has been sort of a lot of the Anorex guys have gotten more into poetry. Mm-hmm. And the reason
I really hate how the kind of people say toxic masculinity, but a lot of the idea, or at least what people said masculinity wasn't like devaluing poetry. Where most of the great poets have been very masculine men.
Yeah, well, yeah, and well, regardless of whether they are very masculine men or they weren't, what poetry allows you to do or come in contact with is something that is very real and is not overly pretentious or overly involved in some kind of larger thing. And I feel that in some sense, sort of the kind of visceral, beauty, the esoteric beauty that I find so missing in the post 2012 world, or in the post 2021 world more acutely, I feel kind of draws it out a lot more. I feel like you can kind of reconnect it. Mm-hmm. You can kind of reconnect to it, and of course, past generations were much more connected to things like this than we are right now.
Yeah, like I fell in love with a lot of Rudyard Kipling's poetry. I have a collection of some of his best stuff, and it's just, man, it's a sign of a much more confident era.
Yeah, I mean, he was pretty late to it, right? There's the he gave all these great speeches to the to writing societies across the world. Where there's a very famous one that he gave to the Canadian Writers Society, and he kind of pretended a perspective on the world that his dream for the world was very different than what ultimately came about. And he was unfashionable by the time he was a prominent writer. By the time that his stuff became prominent, like, imperialism was really out of fashion, and the idea that a confident Western world order would guide the human race forward, yeah, that was gone. And so he's sort of the last scion of that entire world, in my opinion.
Yeah, but yeah, like I guess on my front, it's funny that both me and Argent Templar, our friend Argent Templar, have kind of I both inadvertently gotten into kind of the history of the mafia and stuff, because he finally got around to watching the Godfather movies, and I started watching The Sopranos. So we're now both reading the book Five Families: The History of the American Mafia, and it's like, it's such a very weird organization, because it's both something that's very ancient and very modern, because I've also been learning about, listening to the great podcast on Roman history, and it's just like, you have this extreme emphasis on familial and dynastic lineage, but you also have this very kind of modern mercantile organization. But yeah,
I can see that.
And it's just because, I had one great grandmother who was Italian, so I'm like, well, I'm basically Julius Caesar. I'm the eternal self-hating Anglo, but
maybe if we really are headed for third worldization, maybe this idea of organized crime evolving into like these miniature feudal aristocracies is not so far from so out of the realm of possibility.
But yeah, it's like, because I kind of have to go in a little bit, but just kind of talking about stuff we're looking forward to and all that, is being on my own now, just thinking about simplicity, is I've realized how much I enjoy cooking. Because like, just trying to pick up hobbies that aren't video games, because so many, as of late, video games do not give me a lot of enjoyment anymore. It just feels like I have the same few that I like, and everything else I just like can't get into. It feels like a waste of money. Or it's like, there's a few that I still genuinely enjoy, both just gameplay and story-wise. But man, like, I can conquer the galaxy in the game Stellaris, build a huge empire, but I will never get as much satisfaction out of that as I do painting one of my little Warhammer minis. Like I have my whole, I came up with my own backstory for like my little Mechanicus army, and I'm just like, I love the color scheme I got for them. Like, I'm painting them in like a black and gold color scheme. But yeah,
doing things in the real world is very, like, that's very rewarding, right? I think
I've even like, my dad's even said, like, he scoped out, there's actually a good fishing spot near where my parents live, and I'm like, yeah, like, because my dad still has some old fishing rods and tackles, so that's something I actually want to look into, is to pick up fishing. I don't think
part of the Prudentialists are really into fishing. That's never been my thing, but I wanted to do a book reading of The Complete Angler. You aware of that book?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's a very famous English book from the what is it? What do they call? I don't know what the period's called. The period Oliver Cromwell's reign in Britain.
The Puritan or Civil War
the Interregnum or something like the Puritan Interregnum.
Yeah, Interregnum.
So it's a book about fishing, like with these two country gentlemen. And it's very famous for sort of describing fishing as a feature of like the English soul, so to speak. It's almost like Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, but for the 17th century. The Complete Angler. It's a
Okay.
very famous. It's called the most leisurely book ever written in English. And I always wanted the potential. I am not much of a fisherman, but I
I
always wanted the
fished.
potentialist and
My grandparents used to own a summer house, and I fished all the time there. So I'd like to get back to that.
Oh yeah, and cooking is also really great. I don't do much of it anymore because I'm working, but yeah, it's very rewarding because I found the thing is I think like a right wing slow food movement would be kind of funny. I think it would be. I think it kind of needs to happen. Everyone's talking about alliances built between right wingers in America and in England. But really, the more interesting alliance would be the alliance between right wingers in America or England and France. Because France is a very conservative country. We don't consider it very conservative, but I mean, they're incredibly chauvinistic people.
There's a story back in the 1990s when Disney was going to build Disneyland Paris, where they were so incensed by it that literally people tried to bomb the park on its opening day because they just thought the idea of Disney kind of Disneyfying Paris was just so disgusting. They were willing to commit terrorism.
Yeah.
Like one writer said, it's going to turn Paris into a cultural Chernobyl, which is like a very French way of putting it.
Well, they might have wanted to focus on some other, policies that did that more or happen at the same time.
It's like Disneyland Paris, like is probably one of the nicer looking parks. Like for their Space Mountain, they based everything on like Jules Verne and wanting to be kind of like French culture. And then, of course, a few years ago, they just ruined it and turned it into another Star Wars ride. But
well, I mean, this is the whole thing that the Frankish soul is one that rebels against modernity in a big way. And for the longest time, the American conservative movement has been at odds with the French concept of itself for really no reason that I could understand. So I've always hoped that some kind of slow food movement among the reactionaries would bring up a broader understanding of.
It's something I'd love to do because I'm able to learn a lot because my dad was a professional chef for like 25 years. So he's like happy to teach. And, it's to be able to at least just make something that is tasty or that's, filling and healthy is not very hard. Like
that's not at all.
Doing my own grocery shopping. It's like produce and like at least pork is not expensive at all.
I guess pork isn't. Meat's getting pretty expensive these days.
I can get like a top round steak for not that much, but like a nice sirloin, that's a very rare treat.
Yeah, it feels like I appreciate like cooking for yourself is really good, but I'm not satisfied with the cost. It's kind of out of control to a certain degree, in my opinion.
I mean, as opposed to what ordering out, that's even more expensive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's certainly cheap. Well, it's the reason for making your own food is that it's better for you. First and foremost, it's like it's just healthier food if you cook it yourself.
Because if I'm going to be fat, at least I'm fat from my own cooking.
Yeah. I mean, it's surprising. Like you save money by cooking yourself, but you don't save as much money as you used to. And I've noticed that. And I've noticed that with some chagrin because that's kind of, that's kind of ridiculous, right? Like I think that these restaurants are getting deals on products or they're using low quality ones or something like that. But yeah.
I mean, I'm not even going to go anywhere near a fast food restaurant. Like I haven't been to McDonald's or Wendy's in years.
Well, I'll say this: like the thing is with these things like slow food is that we have to make this a question of we can't base our preferences on food on cheapness or convenience. We have to treat it as something of a ceremony and something of a holy action. That I'm not saying we spare no expense, but we have a certain quality we're looking for, a certain experience we're looking for that can take priority over just, the price tag. How does it fit into the budget? How does this weigh up against
that? Reminds me of, if you ever read the book A Tree Grows in Brooklyn.
I don't think I have actually.
It's about a woman. This woman grew. It's like just kind of a growing up story of like a girl growing up in like early or like 19 World War I era in New York, where she's the daughter of like an Austrian immigrant in America, and just kind of dealing with it. And it's they're poor, but she says like something that always stuck with me is they have like this tradition where they're like no matter how expensive it gets or how poor they got, they're always going to have coffee in the house, just as like this kind of point of pride that no matter what, we can still have coffee.
Yeah, I can see that, right? People do the same thing with wine too, right?
Mm-hmm. Like
Although you
right
can get
now,
some pretty cheap wine.
yeah, like right now, I splurged a little bit and made myself. It's a cocktail that I learned from when I was up in the Adirondacks. It's mixing sake and Sauvignon Blanc and lemon juice, and it's pretty good.
Okay. Well, I'm not much of a drinker, although I have a glass of wine every now and again.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I'd like to get. I mean, since I'm from that area of the world, I'm from sort of the prime wine growing area of the United States originally. I wouldn't mind getting into wine tasting and that stuff, but it's something I've had a very hard time with. I've never. I've liked craft beers when I was in my hipster phase, but it never really translated to like this appreciation of wine or something like that.
I mean, I'm still consider myself kind of a beer snob. Just, I mean, at the very least, because I live right near actually, it might dox me. I am fairly close to a very large beer store that has a huge selection, and so I can be kind of picky there. But I have learned that I am not a fan. You know what? People always dunk on IPAs, but sometimes they're not that bad.
Yeah, well, it's like the hipster beer choice.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Like this, I don't know. This whole fashion thing, like in the 2000s, when I was in college, everyone was like, they loved to bash Merlot. Like every hipster would love IPAs and hate the wine Merlot. And now everyone hates IPAs. And does that mean Merlot is like the Merlot wine is still terrible? No, I think it's fine. It's good in some contexts. Like it pairs well with some things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more of a sweeter white wine type of person, so Merlots can be good occasionally. It's just it's like for me, it's just a lot of the more dry red wines I can't get into.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up on the hour. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss or?
Yeah, just I know I kind of got you into this, but I'm glad I'm waiting till fall now because it can be kind of the annual rewatch of Over the Garden Wall. Just an example of a piece of more modern culture that is genuinely phenomenal. I think you and I and your wife all love it.
Yeah, my wife loves that, and we watched every Halloween. Everyone always asks me like, what's the most recent piece of culture or media that just has become an eternal classic, and you'll watch it with your kids, you'll watch it forever. That's my best answer, and that's 2014. Can you think of a more recent one?
I really can't. I mean, although I think Secret of Kells was before then. It's like an Irish animation about this kind of like kid monk trying to protect who's like interacting with like a kind of Irish spirit and like protecting.
And there's a Song of the Sea after that by the same creators, right? Very similar.
I guess Leica Animation had Kubo and the Two Strings, which is a beautiful stop motion animated movie, and that's from 2016. But
yeah, well, I'll have to check it out. But I've learned that there's a difference between being good and being something that feels like you can kind of it really belongs to you. The Northman was a good example of that. It was a very well made movie. But I didn't really emotionally connect with it at all. It was like, okay, it's competent, right?
I mean, yeah, it's great in that it's not paused in the sense of, but
yeah,
in a way it is because it just portrays, Scandinavians as brute savages. Although it is kind of refreshing because you have so much of you had like the Assassin's Creed game where you're a Viking, or like the History Channel Viking show where it's like, because these people hated Christians or fought against Christians, then you can actually, they're a European group that, in a way, they're like the Vosh of like historical groups, right? Where it's like Vosh is, no, I'm the white guy that you can be part of that's on the left. Whereas, and the Vikings are like, hey, we're the white people that you can be kind of in support because we're not Christians. But yeah,
I've experienced that. It goes back and forth. Viking themes are certainly not welcome in Scandinavia and left.
Yeah, But yeah, and
The
it's like,
closer you are to the actual thing, like the less conducive it is sort of like an alternative identity for the left.
mm-hmm.
So you go to like, a good example is like a lot of sort of classic French symbols, where they read left wing in California, they read as right wing in France itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, images of Joan of Arc or something like that, right? But anyway,
well, as you know, in England, of course, is their eternal hatred for the French. They're now going to depict her as like a black lesbian or something. I don't know when to play, but
yeah.
I know.
Well,
Yeah, it's like
there
the
you go.
Northman. The hardest part about that was just like it's the main character is just so unsympathetic because you have that scene where he's in Russia and he's just like this brutal monster, and it's just like this is our protagonist.
Well, there's no convincing redemption arc. That's the first problem.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be one thing if there was a redemption arc, but the audience never really gets to see a redemption arc, or really is never treated to understanding the logic of the main character. It seems like he just chooses brutality over love. And the second thing is that the love story is like no chemistry.
Mm-hmm. Other than the
like,
fact that okay, he's attractive and Anya Taylor-Joy is very attractive. But,
yeah, she's got an amazingly large space between her eyes.
mm-hmm. But I don't know. I think she's pretty. But a movie that I saw afterwards that I actually really enjoyed was is a newer movie, and it's a small one, came out called the Black Phone, which is this kind of small thriller about like a kid. It's like takes place in the late 70s, and this kid is like locked in this basement by Ethan Hawke, who just plays like a kind of psychopath who wears like these creepy masks and stuff, and like he learns that it's like he's hearing voices from this black phone in the room that's actually disconnected from like they're like the ghosts of the other kids that he's kidnapped and killed. And it's kind of more like it's like kind of cool because it ends up with him just going from this kind of awkward nerd to being like just being a regular Chad, and it ends where he just like beats Ethan Hawke to death with a phone.
Well, that's interesting. I'm having a hard time imagining it, but it sounds interesting enough.
And it's based off a short story by Stephen King's son too. But
oh wow,
it's a good movie. It's a little movie. It wasn't like perfect or anything, but I enjoyed it. But
yeah, I just have had terrible luck with movies these days. Even ones that are good just aren't like really good. Like Dune's another example. It's like competent, but like no emotional connection I can feel to it. So it's kind of falls by the wayside.
Older movies that I finally watched that I haven't seen in a while I hadn't seen it before, is I watched Das Boot for the first time and absolutely loved it.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That and I need to get back to rewatching Fall of Eagles. I think I mentioned this last year.
Yeah.
Because
the
it's
one
just
about
like
the three emperors.
Yeah, or it's like the Habsburg, Romanov, and Hohenzollerns, and it's just like it just takes an interesting kind of pro-monarchy side to it. There's a fantastic episode because it has Patrick Stewart playing Lenin, and it contrasts these monarchs who are very, very human and just feel like they fit in a much better era, in a much more previous and civilized era than the creeping modernity, but like their kind of ignorance of that leads to sociopath like Lenin, or like the only reason Germany didn't become a liberal monarchy was because of just the personality and will of Bismarck. But like my favorite episode is actually, or one of my favorites is the episode of where Crown Prince Rudolph of Austria commits murder-suicide with this like girl he's been seeing, or with like his mistress, and like just the reactions that everyone has of like learning the story is just, it's so realistic. Like you just have like his wife is just screaming, and like you have when they first see the body, a guy just runs out and it shows him like throwing up because that's, and like just them having to deal with like, okay, how do we deal with the church's view on this because there was a suicide, issues of burying it, how do we tell the people, how do we, we don't even know the actual reality of what happened yet, or like, and yeah, it's just the only problem is that, since the history of what's going to happen to these people, it feels more like a funeral march.
Yeah, sometimes. I can imagine. It was a miniseries, you said?
It's BBC? A miniseries from the BBC back in the 70s.
Oh, so like I, Claudius and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yes. It's really
all those ones are really good. Yeah, that's really quality television back then.
And and you can like find them, all the episodes on YouTube. So
well, that will be, I've always thought that the right wing would be able to kind of come of age when it could put on cheap theater productions of things.
Because like
And
that show is like, it has, in contrast to the other brilliant, film, one of my favorites, Waterloo, where you have 15,000 extras and they just call them the Soviet army to play extras, Napoleonic era soldiers. You just have the complete opposite, where like the graphics are, when it's showing like, okay, this is the Franco-Prussian War, it's just like two like Monty Python era looking graphics of like armies clashing, because like they did not have the budget and it was all spent on just the actors and just these very theatrical sets, which is where it should have been spent anyway. So
yeah, that's fine. No, like Claudius has no special effects either. You want enough theater kids to be able to put on a good production like that, and then keep them nowhere, allow them to attain no other power politically.
Yes, and it's like it's where as much as people love Lord of the Rings, and like how influential like scenes like the Battle of Helm's Deep or the Pelennor Fields were, so many movies learned the wrong lessons from it, because every fantasy movie after that had to have an epic battle scene. I think the worst was probably something like what that I've only seen part of it, and it's so disgusting. The Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland, where she has to become the Joan of Arc knight, and they're like, oh god,
that's one of my least favorite movies of all time. I think I did a video where I talked
about I think a movie I just have come to completely despise, the Jim Carrey Grinch movie. Like,
I never saw it. So.
When I was a little kid, that scared me, because like I thought the Grinch was scary. Now that movie terrifies me for other reasons, namely the fact that people like it. Well, like, it's just so ugly and just disgusting, and just like, the Who's in Whoville are now awful people.
Every now and again you come to one of those things you really liked as a kid and you see that doesn't hold up.
A lot of Christmas movies are kind of like that.
We're at the hour and we have one super chat. So Hunter Counts says, for $25 USA, after some employment troubles, I'm finally able to contribute to the channel again. So take my money. I also have a question. What are some local conservative one can get involved with? I think it means conservative organizations one can get involved with that are common in most places, besides church, because that's quite obvious, whether they are explicitly political or not. Well, this is tough because there aren't really a lot of them in most places. I mean, this is the thing, as you get closer to big cities, you'll be able to find more kind of reactionary organizations that are just there. And you'll also be able to, like, the conservative churches are actually kind of easier to find because they stand out more, and because the population density is so high that it'll just be there. Someone's saying Knights of Columbus, but Knights of Columbus are more or less, they're extensions of the church, right? Every church.
I don't think it'd be much help. I live kind of out in the sticks near the countryside. It's very nice out here, but...
We're doing sort of like basket weaving. That's academic agents thing, where we have meetups periodically in the area. Oh man, it's really tough. It's really, really tough. Like conservative, I mean, the problem is just that modern recreation is so dominated by the left. It's so like they're the ones that are able to speak in certain areas. So I always remember there was one book group I did, a classic book group that was run by conservatives, and it was amazing. And I went to Portland, which, I moved from the sort of Bay Area to Portland, or Northern California to Portland, I should say. And I went to a book group there, and it was just all dominated by like feminists, and it was horrible. And so, I mean, like, these things are catch as catch can. I think that if you're looking for people are going to be right wing, you go to like Republican organizations and see what they're doing. If you're looking for like culture or recreation, I think you just do whatever you're looking to do in terms of music or culture, and then try to find right wingers. Alternatively, you could use sort of the burgeoning basket weaving communities that we've started that might be able to put you in contact with people who are like totally on side.
Yeah, like I know of a few people that live in the upstate New York area. I'd like to find some way to kind of meet up with them at some point.
Yeah, I know. I think we're doing it down here in the south of you, so it's
Mhm.
not. It's not. It's the only problem is that it's like you have to drive like a few hours, and
Mhm.
for me at this area of my life, that's just very difficult to do. It's not. It doesn't feel as organic as it could be. I love it. I love meeting people, but it's not something that I can incorporate into like a weekly routine
Yeah.
or anything like that. But we're, I know this will be a constant conversation on my channel about what you can do to build community among people who aren't involved in this sort of weird death cult that's come to rule us. But
Mhm.
100 counts, I really appreciate the contribution, and maybe I'll spend more time of talking about that in my monologue podcast that I do every week.
Mhm.
That being said, Fritz, do you have anything else you would like to talk about?
Not really. Just trying to keep on keeping on. Just like it does. It makes me feel guilty about not making more content because I do occasionally just get the message, of you helped bring me to Christianity, even though I was never really trying to do that. But
Mm-hmm.
people are like people still comment on my like why I'm a monarchist video, which is like 5.5 years old, and I
Yeah,
think
that's a good one.
yeah, no, what I'm thinking of doing is I just want to get more into live streaming on like Twitch because there are video game because it can be more fun playing a video game if you have like an audience to talk about the game too.
Yeah, I'm so like the Twitch logic just doesn't make sense to my older millennial mind.
I
I
mean,
feel
because
like it's too passive, and I like live streams. Even live streams, I like to have be about something.
yeah, I mean, if you have like a specific game you're playing, it can help. But I think the biggest problem I think for Twitch is the fact that it's become like a borderline pornographic site because you just have like the hot tub streams. It's like,
Oh, has
you
that
know,
gotten worse?
yeah, you just have like some thought, dancing around in her underwear, and like as opposed when this is a site meant for people that are actually trying to play video games and stream over them, and just like really disgusting.
Yeah.
It's like I don't follow any channels like that at all, of course. It's just, but it's like it still pops up in the feed of like, oh, like no, I don't want to look at this.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's really disappointing. And
yeah.
yeah, well, sic sempre, the glorious moon day, so they say, right? Thus
Hmm.
passes the glory of the. Although I'm not so sure Twitch was ever the glory of the world, or anything even
No.
approaching it. But I look forward to more of your content in the future if you decide to make it. And
Yeah, I mean, I did just upload a video recently, just kind of it was like on my lunch break at work, and I was just like talking about just kind of emphasizing the simple things. But somebody said, "Cool chickens" in the chat said, "Don't mention Twitch. This is a Christian stream." Hey, Catholic Answers streams on Twitch, so like they do
Catholic
stream it on live on.
Trent Horn, the Twitch thought.
Oh, don't bring it up. Trent Horn's a good guy.
Oh yeah,
He's.
I remember him back in the day. He
Yeah.
was
I have
good.
one of his books too, but yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I remember him back in the day in Catholic Answers.
Like
I haven't watched it for a while though.
I occasionally watch it. I watched it a lot more when I like a year ago, just because like I know like apologetics isn't really the most. I know your thoughts on apologetics, but I think they are necessary because Catholic Answers does have track record, or like they do have concrete proof that it has helped bring people to the Catholic faith.
They're necessary for a very, very, very specific person in a very specific place in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have all these European right wingers that like they've come around to like understanding spirituality is a thing, religion is necessary, materialism is stupid. I need to I want a broader community and a morality to follow. And then they'll say things like, well, I just can't believe in Christianity because I can't bring myself to believe it. That's the kind of person you want to give apologetics to.
Yes.
We don't want to give apologetics to people who already have like 1,000 other reasons to reject not only the specific arguments that get you to Christianity, but sort of the presuppositions of those arguments. That's just worthless, especially if they have some kind of pre-existing political conviction.
Mm-hmm. I even have like there's even I think on Pints of Aquinas, Trent Horns, he even mentions like this is a different aspect of it, but he's like, sometimes I just kind of wish I could step from apologetics and just focus on like the mystical aspects, because Christian mysticism, that aspect of the faith is important as well.
Maybe you should do a video on that.
Maybe. I mean,
well, that's very complicated though. But
yeah, I'm still not I'm certainly not the best Catholic, but I try.
Yeah, we all do. Anyway, Fritz, thanks so much for coming on my
Yeah,
stream.
it's
And
great.
if I don't talk to you or sooner, I'll probably talk to you at least next year, right?
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
God
Okay,
bless.
great. Have a great night. Good bless.